Welcome to the Athlete's Compass podcast, your North Star for mastering endurance training and holistic health. Join us each week as renowned sports scientist and founder of Athletica.ai, Paul Laursen, along with athlete, coach, and sports scientist Marjaana Rakai, and coach and cyclist Paul Warloski, guide you through the maze of often confusing training principles. Make sure your compass is ready. Class is now in session. Hello and welcome to the Athlete's Compass, where we navigate training, fitness, and health for everyday athletes. And this week, we are talking about testing. On the Athletica platform for cycling, for example, we have Test Week where we do a functional threshold power FTP test and a power profile test. Marjaana and I did this online the other day together. She was in Houston, I was in Milwaukee, and we did our FTP test together. But before we get into the details of specific tests for runners and cyclists and triathletes, can I tell you too that I do not like test week? I don't know many people who enjoy the testing. Mostly, I don't know. For me, it's because we're never happy with the results. So Paul, why is testing important for endurance athletes?
Yes, testing. I totally hear you, Paul. It's not everyone's, they're not super excited to kind of go and do it, but it is critical at least for Athletica, but mostly for coaching as well. Like even if you're not using Athletica and you're a coach, coaching an athlete, you need to figure out who's in front of you and what their capabilities are. So that's really what it does at the end of the day, is it calibrates who you are and what your capabilities and capacities are from, short to long duration exercise. And only when you have that can you really provide an effective training program to that individual. So that's what it does, whether it's an FTP test, a critical swim speed test, a MAF test, or a 5K running test. This is all in alignment with determining a benchmark of first of all, where the threshold lies, right? And threshold kind of means like how good are you at sustaining exercise? At least as a there's going to be different aspects of that, but like on a broad, with a broad brush, where you kind of sitting, and that's the purpose of Test Week, really, Paul.
Can I just add that I love Test Weeks?
Do you really? Why do you like them? What do you like about it?
It pinpoints where I am, and I mean, I've been like with very low fitness level. And looking back, it's just so amazing to see the progression. If you don't do any tests, how do you know?
Yeah. So, I mean, Marjaana just, again, so the very first purpose, you're right, Marjaana, I missed that one completely. But the first purpose is the calibration. Here's where I'm at. But how is where I'm at today related to where I was, yesterday, 5 years ago? And then going forward 5 years from now, one month from now, whatever, right? Like you're putting a mark in the sand of where things are at today. So that's another really important purpose. And then, it's because with all the things we ever speak about on the Athlete's Compass podcast, it's like, how is X and Y related to the ability to change that threshold, right? So and change my performance outcome. And how does that testing also relate likely to real live performance? Because real live performance, whether it's a cycle race or a triathlon or a duathlon, a running race, that should relate back to the performance that you can actually execute. There should be a one-to-one relationship between those two things. So pretty important for that too.
Mm-hmm. I have to say though that I understand if you don't like Test Week. I've been there too. Like I used to take when you have tests at school. Oh my gosh, I did not like tests at school because I put too much value in them. Like your test result is not the value of you. So I kind of learned to take it as a, like, I guess, growth mindset. And now it's just like a little mini race. I get the butterflies in my belly and I enjoy it, but I am a very competitive person. Like, I love a little race sometimes. So maybe that's why I like test weeks.
Yeah, for sure. That's awesome. Yeah, and
So
I mean, you should have that, right? Like, I mean, you got to get up for these sorts of things, right?
Yeah,
like
you gotta pump yourself up a little.
Yeah, I mean, most of these are kind of sustained efforts, right, for a given period of time. So you really have to, read the instructions, recognize what you're going to do, and this kind of comes back to the pacing of these efforts too, right? A lot of people will say, "Oh, I went out way too hard, and as soon as I had, burned that match or whatever, right? Like it was a long back half of that test kind of thing, right? Like that inevitably always happens to me. I'm like, oh, I'm gonna try and hold X number of watts, or I'm gonna hold X pace kind of thing, right? It's good to have these sorts of things. It doesn't matter too much at the end of the day. It's going to be what it's going to be. The calculations will be made accordingly. But it's like it's sometimes that last half is like you remember it quite well,
Now, are you taking numbers, like target numbers from your past?
Unfortunately, yes, Marjaana.
Performances and you haven't put the work in.
This is the problem. I used to be a better version of myself from a performance standpoint. I can't forget those, but it's no longer the case. So this is life.
So what are some of the for cycling? To start with cycling, what are the common tests that are used? What do they measure? What are the effect? Critical power, FTP, ramp tests. Green Biker, one of our listeners, asked about the importance of using heart rate during cycling tests. What if you don't have power? Can you use heart rate and speed, for example?
Yeah, so ideally in the cycling context, Paul, we really want to leverage the power meters. So we recognize that those are an investment, but you certainly, if you're committed to your endurance training, it's a good thing to put on the Christmas wish list or the birthday wish list or whatever it kind of might be if you're a cyclist or a triathlete using cycling. They are pretty darn effective because you're getting you're getting the gold standard version of what we call your external training load, the external training stress. And it couples really nicely with the heart rate too. It's kind of like not one or the other. It's the same sort of thing. A lot of coaches in the cycling world will just say, "Oh, we don't even need heart rate," right? It's kind of just as bad. It's like you really ideally want to have one external load marker, power or pace, like pace in the GPS context, and you want to have at least one internal load marker, like a heart rate, which is measuring like how is your cardiovascular system and nervous system sort of responding to the external load that's being applied. Athletica is going to work best in that context. So yeah, it certainly can be done, Paul. In terms of just the speed with the heart rate, Athletica can function in there. Just if I'm honest, it won't function as effectively. Oh, sorry. Maybe I didn't. Yeah, I didn't answer the question. Sorry, Paul. I didn't answer the question right. So. Yeah. So the first part you were talking about. Well, what are the tests for cycling? And from Green Biker, right? Like so. And yeah, it's typically that FTP test. FTP stands for Functional Threshold Power Test. 20 minutes all out, and it's a good indicator of what you can do for an hour, right? And kind of relates back to some of the central training load philosophies and calculations that's really leveraged by Andy Kogan and Training Peaks, and that's their sorts of principles. We have we've kind of taken this to the next level now, and we're currently implementing critical power. So if you go to the Athletica charts, you'll see your critical power curve, right? So if you've been on Athletica for more than, if you've got at least 2 weeks of data that are on there, you can actually see your critical power curve. And that's using best practices from Peter Leo and colleagues. He's a Tour de France trainer and German. I've interviewed him, one of the most popular podcasts in the training science podcasts. But basically, this is like gold standard best practice for looking at your power profile. At least, we believe it is. You have both your short-term power on that critical power thing. So how effective are you at the punchy stuff, like sprinting, short sprints, to VO2 max type efforts over 3 to 5 minutes, to critical power FTP kind of levels in your threshold, to very, very long ultra endurance activity if in the contexts of the ultra endurance cyclist or triathlete or even runner. So we sort of capture it all in there. This is why we love our power profile and our pace profiles so much, because we really capture everyone on there, and those are, yeah, we're pretty proud of that. So we're currently in the process of switching over from your FTP kind of calculations over to critical power, which are automated from when you just basically you download. If you join us Athletica and you've joined us recently, your 2 years of Garmin data will be uploaded into Athletica, and we'll have a general picture of what you have been able to do over the last 2 years, and we get a pretty good indicator of what that power profile should look like. And moving forward, it's a more effective means to continually monitor that power profile, because you can do it invisibly versus just doing these sort of formal tests. We can do both. Do a formal power profile test where you're doing that's on Athletica. We're doing a series of short efforts, medium efforts, long efforts, and it's kind of equivalent. This is what Peter Leo tells us. He's like, at the end of the day, you're getting the same number, FTP versus critical power. It's not too much different, but one is sort of easier to do. It's easier to monitor critical power. So that's why we're switching to that. So good questions, Green Bike. Hopefully I answered some.
In the Athletica forum, there was a coach who also asked, instead of doing FTP test, if an athlete who is not used to doing a 20 minutes all out, because it requires a little bit of knowledge how to pace, is ramp test. Can they do ramp test instead of FTP test?
Yes. Yep. And again, this is what we're implementing at this very point in time. We're implementing the critical power, philosophy or calculations in there. So that will, if it's a test to exhaustion, as it is in a ramp test, just for the listener, make sure they're clear on what a ramp test is. This is when you might be starting at a low exercise level for you. Something like 50 to 100 watts, and then you're slowly, progressively at a set rate, like 3 minutes, increasing that by a small amount from one time to the next until you can't go anymore, and it's just too hard. So you're going to get a maximal all-out level at that as well. As long as there's that maximal effort at the end, then we should, in theory, be able to capture your critical power in from that as well. Great question, Marjaana.
What about running tests? What do we, our MAF tests? Is that the way to go?
Well, first of all, we're doing on the running tests. We're currently following Jack Daniels' methods, and Jack Daniels does 5 kilometers all out. So that's what we're currently using. Your best effort over 5K. And but honestly, there's that might be too hard for some, so we can capture it using a critical pace profile as well in a shorter duration too. We could capture that like for 3 kilometers, say, for example. So these same methods will be applied nicely for runners. Now, when you asked about MAF tests, this stands for Maximal Aerobic Function. And these are more like, we think we've talked about them before when we talked about the threshold episode. And we talked about the fact that there's 2 thresholds. We've been talking about the anchoring of the second threshold, your maximal lactate steady state, or your FTP. That's the best one, the high intensity one. But now when you talk about MAF, you're talking about more of your sustained fat burning intensity. And this one is associated with the first ventilatory threshold, or the lactate threshold, a 1 millimole increase in lactate over baseline, and associated with what we also call your fat max, or the maximal ability of your body to burn fat and use it as a fuel, and which probably relates to a concept I think we've spoken about before too, called durability, like your ability to endure for long periods of time. So Ironman athletes, successful Grand Fondo cyclists, ultra endurance runners will have successful ones will have very high levels of their MAF intensity. So their intensity relative to their MAF heart rate, which is in general 180 minus age. But again, there's lots of, it's ultimately the top of your L2, is probably we're finding more accurate. So this is again pioneered by the legendary Phil Maftone, and yeah, you basically, this is your submax sustained pace and associated heart rate. And maybe I should tell you, maybe I should also allude to how we test that, just for clarity. This is typically when we're either going for 5 consecutive kilometers at that set heart rate. So the MAF testing procedures, again, according to Phil Maftone, we take that 180 minus our age as a marker, or if you're on Athletica and you're pretty confident about that your zones are set well, then check out the top of your L2 level and go at that heart rate for either, you could do it in the cycling context. We have this as well, but also in the running context. Just try to lock into that heart rate as fast as you can, and then expect your pace to kind of diminish as it goes, but just hold that heart rate as long as you can. Now, the better your MAF ability is going to be reflected by your ability to hold pace for longer or have less of a fall off in pace. It's going to be what it's going to be, but just see what that pace sort of sits at. What you find when you are better fat adapted, when your durability increases, is that the pace or power relative to that locked heart rate, keep the heart rate always the same. Like, find out what's right for you. Just always go at that sort of same heart rate for you. It shouldn't change too much, and then just see what that pace kind of holds at, and power holds at for either 5 kilometers as if you're a beginner, or 8 kilometers, 5 miles if you are a kind of more a little bit, if you look at 5 miles or 8K and it looks manageable to you, kind of thing. And yeah, that's the submax test that we have, Paul.
I've noticed that MAF, as a long distance triathlete, that MAF test has been super confidence building, because 2 years ago when I did my first, I don't remember exactly like how many watts I increased. I think I went from like 165 watts to 180 watts
That's big.
in 2 years, while I've reduced my body weight. And so to me, that's just it's confidence builder that I can do a long distance bike ride at that fat max and not burning too many matches before my marathon run. So I really like that test.
So what's happened to you in 2 years, do you think, Marjaana? I'm challenging you here. Why are we seeing lower body mass in general and higher power at the same heart rate? What's going on? What have you latched onto?
So I came from overtraining and lots of good quality zone 2 training, good quality sleeps, and good quality nutrition. So I've changed my nutrition a lot. going kind of low carb, high fat, which ultimately to me meant cutting out processed foods and eating really healthy. And that has had a huge impact on my body weight and body composition. And therefore, I can sustain watts per K for longer or at a higher level. So that's what we want as Ironman athletes, right?
Yeah, for sure. You nailed it. And so ultimately you're able to latch on, or you're able to burn the fat that is stored on your body much easier. It's more accessible to you for these longer event, for shorter and longer. Like exactly, like you'll leverage that fuel that you're holding on to faster, and it'll be easier, and your metabolic output at those lower exercise intensities will be much greater. Your power will be higher. Your pace will be higher. You're burning less, and you're burning less matches at the higher end as well. So better performance.
Yeah. Talking about running tests, I'm running the 5K faster than I was. So
everything gets lifted. That's it, right? Yeah. So we got back to testing. We have these two key tests. We're testing the lower level, the first threshold with the MAF tests. We're testing the high end, but for both of these, we should be lifting. The goal of Athletica, the goal of any training program, any coach should be to lift these parameters higher in the training program through all of these various different means, including training, but also lifestyle factors that you mentioned as well. And again, the purpose is to have a better output at the end of the day. And this is what we measure in the testing.
Yeah, and MAF testing is not done, as far as I know, anywhere else than in Athletica. So kudos.
Mark P. Foster asked about racing, and can racing, for instance, Marjaana talks about doing 5Ks. Can those be used in place of testing?
Yes, absolutely. So if again, this can be quite convenient, because if you have a race and you measure it on your watch, your wearable, you're going to have an all-out effort. You're likely going to have an all-out effort. So it's the opportune time to almost lay down a test invisibly for Athletica. And the cool thing about Athletica is that it watches and it measures that. And you should, if you score a personal best on a race of a similar duration, unless it's a ultra endurance run or bike or whatever, where you might be lower, it's probably not going to pick up there because you're not at these higher exercise intensities. But if it's if you happen to have a 5 or a 10K run scheduled, you're probably, if you've trained well and you've seen these you've seen enhancements in your ability to output power pace, then you'll see that you'll be prompted to change your thresholds. And when you change your thresholds, that lifts all of your zones, and then your training will follow through accordingly as well.
Jesse White asked about the MAF test being different for individuals with less training, and you kind of answered that, but let's see if we can get some more. Are there any special considerations for those using the tests for different types of endurance athletes, beginners versus elites?
Yeah, so we've so this is to a colleague, David Yule, kind of came up with this. He's a running specialist. He's on our Coach Connect, and Dave really, he modified nicely, I believe, the MAF testing for individual runners that come in without much experience, coach to 5K kind of level, we sort of say. And that's so here you're only going to be doing, the most you'll be doing is 5 kilometers versus the more experienced runners, we're asking to do 5 miles or 8 kilometers. So in the 5 kilometer coach to 5K level, you can even, this includes walking. I should really be clear on that. So if you are coached to 5K, it might just be a walk level, and that's okay, right? So you might be just starting out, and if you're asked to go at that heart rate, and if right out of the gates heart rate is high at a walking level, that's okay too, right? Just try to walk the distance and at that heart rate, whatever it may be. But going through the program, it will be, you'll continue to kind of make gains, especially if you're also leveraging some of the lifestyle factors that Marjaana was talking about as well. So that's those are the two levels that we sort of have, Paul. The 5K test and the math are on the low volume programs, and the higher ones are on the medium to higher volume programs for the 8K or 5 miles.
How should somebody prepare taking these tests? Any good tips?
What would I do? Well, again, you kind of alluded to it as well, Marjaana. So you get a little excited for these. It's like, it's test day, right? So be excited for them. You want to kind of get it right as best you can. Keep in mind that you don't have to hit start, or you definitely don't have to hit start on your watch, but you don't have to lap it or anything like that. So don't be lapping your watch, because it's kind of a distraction. Athletica is going to take whatever you have captured on that throughout the duration, and it's going to be able to filter and parse out the data of importance. We actually have a technology called a parser. It's an important part of Athletica that actually parses out the data of importance for us before it sends it to the brain of Athletica in the back end. Before the back end sends the information to the front. So just go press start and then press stop at the end of the day. Let Athletica do the job, and Bob's your uncle.
I would, if I can add, I would also jump on a scale if you're a cyclist. Jump on a scale and make sure that Athletica has your weight correct, and then you can look at the watts per kilo and not just looking at absolute values of FTP.
Yeah, some other, and again, don't just jump on the scale, but I would also make sure you're hydrated. Start the day with some water, and it is a test. You'd want to use the toilet beforehand. Like, these are all kind of standard things that we'd check if we were going to be testing in a laboratory. So it's the same sort of things, right? So prep yourself, and remember that this is also something that you're probably going to want to repeat. So in the context of at least laboratory experiments, we always want to have the same conditions. So ideally, you want to do the same thing, even if it's a field test, even at, say you're doing say it's an FTP test or a critical power test, and you've said, you know what, I'm not going to do this on my ergometer. I'm going to do it outside. Try to have the conditions the same. Use the same hill for all of these sorts of tests. Try to have your temperature the same, the environment the same. Ideally, if you can, or if you are in your own pain cave or whatever. Again, for use the same pain cave, use the same ergometer, all these sorts of things. They all kind of make a small impact on the data that we'd have to kind of consider. So for repeatability, do things the same.
Calibrate your power meter.
Calibrate your power meter.
Calibrate.
Yep. Find out the instructions on how to calibrate your power meter and keep it the same all the time.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
What are some pitfalls? What are some common mistakes that people make? Maybe we just answered that question when to avoid when running a bike or a run test for endurance athletes. I mean, obviously we need to prepare and be ready. But what are some mistakes? I can imagine overpacing is one, or underpacing.
Yep, over or underpacing. Although overpacing is definitely the more common one, at least for me. Too hard from the beginning. You'll come and see that I could have gone harder. You reading the comments, I could have gone harder, but this is what I did, right? Like, so that's so common.
That's it.
And then equipment malfunction, right? Whether it's a poorly calibrated power meter, the power meter kind of failing, often the heart rate monitor, potentially failing as well, right? Like if it's just, it didn't get a good connection because the heart rate strap wasn't wet enough or whatever to pick up the heart rate signal, or using a wrist-based heart rate monitor that isn't as good relative to a chest strap. Again, if you're doing any of these tests, try to use your chest strap if you have one. They're far more reliable in general, but not always. So yeah, and again, one of the tests that we haven't really spoken too much about, but we should for the triathletes that are listening, and that's the critical swim speed test, right? And we use a 400 meter all out and a 50 meter all out for the triathletes. And here we're testing this right now. We are not far from the swim watches, like the Forerunner series, being good enough to kind of capture and automate a pace profile, but we're not at this time of recording, we're not there yet. So you need to, at this point, actually record your own time for 400 meters and 50 meters all out. And then we're putting a little place in where you can enter those times to calibrate that swim critical speed. But also, if you're a triathlete listening, send the data to me via the form, and I'll reply with your pace, and I'll even update your zones for you, or you can do the same. So it doesn't take too much time. But yeah, at this point in the time, you need to the swim technology is just starting to get there, where we're confident enough that we can actually capture a pace profile. But we're just on the cusp. It's exciting that we're there, because it's been so long where it just hasn't even been close. But now Garmin's really improved, and they're getting close to us being confident on the reliability of that data that's coming in on pace and heart rate too. The heart rate is actually getting better and better for swimming. I can't believe it. But it blows me away. But I'm actually I'm using my Forerunner in swimming, and I'm looking at the heart rate of it during some of my sessions, and I'm like, oh, wow, that's actually not too bad. And it hasn't been there for so long, but their algorithms and AI on the heart rate capture is getting better and better, as we would expect over time. So it's very exciting.
Do you have a strap for the swimming, or just the watch?
I just use the watch. No.
Okay.
And again, straps for swimming have a lot of issues associated with them.
Sure.
When if you do a decent flip turn and you push off that wall, there's a lot of force and hydrodynamic pressures that are going on, and there's so many times that that chest strap just falls straight down, and even if you've got it on really tight, and even if it's really tight, it's restricting some of the breathing as well. So there's just that option is often there on many of the Forerunner series, or even Polar products and others. But it will be very good if you can just get it solid on the wrist, and they're starting to get there, because that practicality kind of wins out.
Interesting. So how many times a year should we be doing these tests?
Well, context, Marjaana. Context over content always. And to me, it comes down to practicality at the end of the day. So if you're starting out on a journey to do your event, then that's a great time to lay down a starting test, right? And that's why at the beginning of all the Athletica programs, we start with a test week. And you'll see that on your settings, your training settings, you'll have the ability to include or exclude a test week. And we often, there's just like a little tab at the end, right? So if you're resetting your program, you'll always have the option to, click the box to exclude the test week. But if you don't exclude that, or if you don't hit that box, then we include a test week, because we assume that you're starting something brand new. So I think at the beginning of any program is a great time to do that, and that's And then the race, like Paul was saying too, like the race is the ultimate test too, right? Like that's the key thing. Like how much did we increase our fitness to enhance our performance, and we can measure that in the race. So yeah, that's what I like personally. I like at the start of a journey towards an A race is my personal preference. It makes the most practical kind of sense. And then if you are doing key sets in there, like consistent, like threshold sessions, that are around your second threshold. If your fitness is all of a sudden really enhanced, you'll get a notification that you might want to raise your thresholds. So listen to that, consider it. If it was an honest effort, then I would accept that recommendation. And then if it wasn't, and it was just, it's a potentially an equipment error, then dismiss it and don't accept it. So again, you appreciate your context as a coach and athlete, and make the change according to that.
What do you see as the future of performance testing in endurance sports? I mean, are there emerging trends or technologies that we should be aware of? Like, what about continuous lactate monitoring or other devices that may come out that you know of, both of you?
Oh yeah. Well, your timing is perfect on that question, Paul. I actually have a meeting tomorrow with one of a number of continuous lactate companies that are emerging into the market. So yeah,
cool.
so that's this one leverages your the lactate that's on in your sweat. So and then there's of course others. So there's a lot's happening, and I do believe that will be a fascinating innovation that emerges in the next 5 years. And yeah, no question. And how will we use that? Well, again, how does it correspond to some of these field tests that we're using, like we've just been through, right? How does it compare to the critical power test? How does it compare to the FTP test? How does it compare to the MAF test? Yeah, and then how does that look in a short interval session or a long interval session? How is this corresponding to some of the some of the aerobic, anaerobic, and neuromuscular variables that we sometimes talk about? I'm starting to talk a little bit fast. I get so excited about these sorts of things, Paul. Yeah.
What about running power?
Yeah, running power is high on the list as well. Nice call, Marjaana. And for sure, it's we have downplayed this one for a long time because of the black box kind of concepts and whatnot. But the market tends to lead. Like they're clearly getting some value out of this one. I think they're getting better and better with their AI on the various power monitoring devices. So we are working towards adding that into the suite of variables that we accept in Athletica. It's easier said than done, though. So at the moment, we are still using pace, and there's a lot of small things around. Well, what do you do if they have both, right? Like, what variable trumps the other one, and all these kinds of different insights, and what variable are we using to establish load? So yeah, it's on the consideration list, and it's in the logic pipeline. But yeah, a lot of internal debates about this one right now that are fun. So hang tight, and it's definitely coming.
So here are 3 things that I have learned this week about testing. Number 1, testing is a mark in the sand, in the words of Paul. It's a calibration of your fitness. Number 2, testing is important to monitor your progress and know if your training is working. You can identify your training thresholds and see how they are changing. And number 3, testing is not the value of you. And that is what Marjaana has reminded me of. It's like a little mini race, and that's it. And there's nothing more to it. Now, instead of hating testing, at least I'm more open to it. So that is all for this week. Thanks for listening, and join us next week for the Athlete's Compass. You can help us by asking your training questions in the comments, liking and sharing the podcast, giving us 5-star reviews, and engaging with us on the social media. For Marjaana Rakai and Dr. Paul Laursen, I'm Paul Warloski, and this has been the Athletes Compass podcast. Thanks for listening. We hope you enjoyed another episode of the Athletes Compass podcast, your guiding light through the complex world of training for your endurance sport. For a deeper dive into the science, listen to our companion podcast, the Training Science Podcast, and check out the AI adaptive training platform, Athletica.ai. Thanks.